I was halfway through loading oxygen tanks into my truck when I saw Brenda Kensington storming across the parking lot like a heat-seeking missile locked onto its target. The morning sun glinted off her oversized sunglasses, and her perfectly coiffed blonde hair didn't move an inch despite the February wind whipping through our Colorado subdivision. I knew that look. It was the same expression she'd worn when she'd cited Mrs. Patterson for having the wrong shade of beige on her mailbox. "Vincent Kovacs," she called out, waving a manila folder above her head. "We need to talk about your violation." I set down the tank carefully and turned to face her, already feeling the tension building in my shoulders. Brenda was the president of the Silverstream Hills HOA, a position she wielded with the authority of a medieval tyrant. Our subdivision sat just outside Boulder, where the foothills met the plains, and she'd made it her life's mission to ensure every single one of the 215 homes met her exact specifications. "Morning, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What violation would that be?" She thrust the folder at me, her French manicured nails tapping against the cardboard impatiently. "Your ski rack." Section 12. Subsection 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no external vehicle modifications that alter the visual profile of the vehicle are permitted to remain visible when the vehicle is parked in a driveway or street. I glanced at my truck. The ski rack sat mounted on top of my white Ford F-250, the same rack I'd been using for 3 years without incident. The same truck I'd been using for 5 years to make medical deliveries throughout our neighborhood and the surrounding area. "Brenda, I need that rack for work," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "You know I run medical deliveries. Half the people in this neighborhood depend on me for their oxygen, their medications, their medical equipment. That rack holds the longer items I can't fit in the bed." "That's not my concern," she replied, her lips pressed into a thin line. "The bylaws are clear. You have 72 hours to remove it, or we'll begin fining you $50 per day until compliance is achieved." I opened the folder she'd handed me. Sure enough, there were photos of my truck taken from multiple angles, each one showing the ski rack clearly visible. Someone had gone to considerable effort to document this supposed violation. The letter inside cited the exact bylaw she'd mentioned, along with a timeline for compliance and the fine structure. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I've had this rack for 3 years. Why is it suddenly a problem?" "We've recently decided to enforce all bylaws more strictly," Brenda said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Several homeowners have complained about the declining aesthetic standards in our community. We're simply ensuring everyone follows the same rules. Declining aesthetic standards. We're talking about a ski rack on a work truck." "A work truck that you park in your driveway," she countered. "If you need to use a vehicle for commercial purposes, perhaps you should consider parking it elsewhere. This is a residential community, Vincent. We have standards to maintain. Property values to protect." I felt my jaw clench. "Brenda, I'm not parking my truck somewhere else. I live here. I work here. Half my clients are in this neighborhood. Mrs. Chen 3 streets over needs oxygen deliveries twice a week. Bill Morrison on Oakwood needs his CPAP supplies every month. Your own neighbor, Margaret, depends on me for her diabetic supplies." "Then remove the rack when you're not actively using it," she said, as if this were the most obvious solution in the world. "It's bolted to the roof. I can't just pop it off and on whenever I feel like it. It takes tools and time, and frankly, I need it almost daily." "Not my problem," Brenda said, turning to leave. 72 hours, Vincent, starting now." I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the asphalt, and felt the anger bubbling up in my chest. This was typical Brenda. She'd moved into Silverstream Hills 2 years ago after her divorce, immediately joined the HOA board, and within 6 months had maneuvered herself into the president position. Since then, she'd made everyone's life miserable with her constant citations, her arbitrary rule interpretations, and her complete lack of common sense. I finished loading the oxygen tanks and checked my delivery schedule for the day. 14 stops, including 3 in our own neighborhood. Mrs. Chen was first on my list. She was 83 years old, lived alone, and suffered from severe COPD. Without her oxygen tanks, she couldn't breathe properly. Without me delivering them, she'd have to arrange transportation to the medical supply company 30 miles away, something she couldn't physically manage. The drive to Mrs. Chen's house took 3 minutes. She lived in a smaller ranch-style home, painted a soft yellow that had probably been approved by the HOA decades ago, when the rules were more reasonable. I loaded her tanks onto my hand truck and wheeled them to her front door. "Vincent," she said when she answered, her smile warm despite the oxygen cannula in her nose. "Right on time as always." "Morning, Mrs. Chen," I said, wheeling the tanks inside to her designated storage area. "How are you feeling today?" "Oh, can't complain," she said, though I could hear the slight wheeze in her breathing. "Getting old isn't for the weak, that's what I always say." I spent a few minutes checking her equipment, making sure everything was functioning properly and swapping out her empty tanks. She offered me tea as she always did, and I declined as I always did, promising to take her up on it when I had more time. "You're a good boy, Vincent," she said as I prepared to leave. "Your mother raised you right." "I try, Mrs. Chen." My next stops included Bill Morrison, who greeted me in his bathrobe and asked about the Broncos' chances next season, and the Patterson family, whose 6-year-old son had juvenile diabetes and needed his insulin pump supplies. Every stop reminded me why I'd started this business in the first place, and why Brenda's demand was so infuriating. I'd been working as a paramedic when I started the medical delivery service 5 years ago. I'd seen too many patients struggling to get their necessary medical supplies, either because they couldn't drive, couldn't afford delivery fees from the big companies, or simply fell through the cracks of an overburdened healthcare system. So I'd started small, making deliveries on my days off, charging reasonable rates, and building relationships with local medical supply companies and pharmacies. It had grown bigger than I'd anticipated. Now I had contracts with 3 major medical supply companies, 2 pharmacy chains, and several independent pharmacies. I made deliveries 6 days a week, covering a 40-mile radius from Silverstream Hills. I'd hired 2 part-time employees last year to help with the volume. It wasn't making me rich, but it was honest work that actually helped people, and that meant something. The ski rack wasn't just for show. I used it to transport longer items like crutches, walkers, portable Roman IV poles, and the longer oxygen tanks that wouldn't fit in my truck bed with all the other supplies. Without it, I'd have to make multiple trips for some deliveries, which would increase costs and reduce efficiency. It was a necessary piece of equipment for my business, but Brenda didn't care about that. She cared about her precious aesthetic standards and her power trip. I finished my deliveries around 5 that evening and headed home. My house sat near the back of the subdivision, a 2-story colonial with gray siding and white trim that had passed HOA inspection when I'd bought it 4 years ago. I'd deliberately chosen something neutral and inoffensive to avoid HOA issues. Fat lot of good that had done me. Inside, I heated up leftover pizza and sat down at my kitchen table with Brenda's violation letter. I read through the cited bylaws carefully, looking for any loophole or exception. The language was frustratingly vague in some places and oddly specific in others, the result of decades of amendments and additions. Section 12. Subsection 4 read exactly as Brenda had said, prohibiting external vehicle modifications that altered the visual profile. But Section 9. Subsection 2 stated that reasonable accommodations should be made for home-based businesses that served the community. And Section 6. Subsection 7 mentioned exceptions for medical equipment and supplies. I wasn't sure if either applied to my situation, but it was worth investigating. I spent the next hour researching HOA laws in Colorado. What I found was both encouraging and frustrating. HOAs had broad authority to enforce their bylaws, but they couldn't act arbitrarily or discriminatorily. They had to apply rules consistently and couldn't single out individual homeowners without cause. If I could prove that Brenda was targeting me specifically, or that other homeowners had similar violations that weren't being enforced, I might have a case. The next morning, I drove through the neighborhood before starting my deliveries. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. 3 houses down from Brenda, Tom Harrison had a truck with a ladder rack. 2 streets over, the Mackenzie family had an SUV with a roof cargo carrier that had been there for months. On Maple Drive, someone had a truck with actual commercial lettering and equipment racks. None of them had been cited, as far as I knew. I took photos of each vehicle with my phone, making sure to capture the street signs and house numbers for reference. Then I headed to the HOA office, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that Brenda used as her command center. She was there, of course, sitting behind a desk covered in folders and sticky notes. Her expression when I walked in suggested I was the last person she wanted to see. "Vincent," she said, "I hope you're here to confirm you'll be removing that rack." "Actually, I'm here to point out that you're not enforcing the bylaws consistently," I said, setting my phone on her desk with the photos pulled up. "These are all vehicles in our neighborhood with roof racks or modifications. None of them have been cited." Brenda barely glanced at the photos. "Those are different situations." "How so?" "Tom Harrison's ladder rack is part of his professional equipment. He's a licensed contractor. The Mackenzies are using a temporary cargo carrier, and that truck on Maple belongs to a plumber who was doing work in the neighborhood. It's not permanently parked there." "That's not true," I said. "I've seen that plumber's truck parked at that house every evening for the past 2 months. And how is my situation different from Tom's? I use my rack for professional equipment too, medical equipment that serves this community." "The difference is that Tom applied for and received approval from the board," Brenda said smoothly. "You did not. This was news to me. There's an approval process, of course. It's in the bylaws. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3. Any homeowner wishing to maintain external vehicle modifications must submit a written application to the board explaining the necessity and receiving approval by majority vote. I hadn't seen that in my reading last night, but I wasn't about to admit it. "Fine. I'll submit an application." "You can certainly try," Brenda said. "But I should warn you that the board meets once a month, and our next meeting isn't for 3 weeks. Your 72 hours will be long expired by then. So I'll pay the fines until the meeting." "At $50 per day, that's over $1,000, she said. "Are you prepared to spend that much on principal?" I felt the frustration building again. This was clearly a setup. She deliberately cited me right after the last board meeting, ensuring maximum fines before I could even plead my case. "I'll take my chances," I said. Back in my truck, I called my lawyer, Dave Zimmerman. Dave had handled the paperwork when I'd set up my LLC for the medical delivery business. He listened to my explanation, asked a few clarifying questions, and promised to review the HOA bylaws and get back to me. In the meantime, he said, document everything. Every interaction with Brenda, every delivery you make, especially to people in your neighborhood. If she's interfering with a legitimate business that serves the community, we might have grounds to challenge this. I spent the rest of the week doing exactly that. I documented every delivery, got statements from several clients about how essential my service was, and researched similar cases in Colorado. I also discovered something interesting. Brenda had cited 17 other homeowners in the past 6 months for various violations, but I couldn't find records of any of them being fined or facing enforcement action after initial warnings. It seemed I was special. The 72 hours expired on Friday. By Saturday morning, I had a new letter from the HOA informing me that I was now accruing $50 per day in fines. By Monday, I owed $150. By Friday of the following week, I was up to $500. That's when things got interesting. I was making a delivery to Margaret Sullivan, Brenda's neighbor, when I saw Brenda watching from her window. Margaret was 76, recovering from hip surgery, and needed daily wound care supplies. She'd been one of my first clients when I started the business. I heard Brenda's giving you trouble, Margaret said as I helped her organize her supplies. She told me at the mailbox yesterday that you were running an illegal business out of your home. Illegal, I said. That's not true. I have all the proper licenses and permits. I told her she was being ridiculous, Margaret said. I told her that you've been nothing but helpful to everyone in this neighborhood. Do you know what she said? She said that's not the point. The point is maintaining standards. That sounds like Brenda. She's on a power trip, Margaret continued. Ever since Gerald moved out and she got that board position, she's been insufferable. Last month she cited the Hendersons because their Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd. She said they had to be down by January 1st, or it violated the seasonal decoration bylaws. I shook my head. The stories about Brenda were legendary in the neighborhood, but most people were too afraid of citations to push back against her. That evening, Dave called me back with news. I've reviewed everything, he said. The good news is that Brenda's on shaky legal ground with this enforcement action. She's not applying the rules consistently, and her timing suggests targeted harassment. The bad news is that fighting this through the HOA's internal process could take months, and the fines will keep accumulating. What do you suggest? File your application for the next board meeting. In the meantime, I'll send a letter to the HOA board pointing out the inconsistent enforcement and requesting they suspend fines pending your hearing. If they refuse, we can consider filing a complaint in county court, but that's expensive and time-consuming. Do it, I said. Send the letter. Dave's letter went out Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I had a response from Brenda, not from the board. She denied any inconsistent enforcement, stated that the fines would continue, and suggested that if I didn't like the HOA rules, I was free to sell my home and move elsewhere. The passive-aggressive suggestion that I should just leave my home made my blood boil. I'd worked hard to buy this house. I'd built my business serving this community. And now, Brenda was trying to force me out over a ski rack. I decided to take a different approach. If Brenda wanted to play hardball, I could too. Wednesday morning, I printed out flyers explaining the situation. I kept them factual and professional, outlining the violation, the fines, the inconsistent enforcement, and how it affected my ability to serve the neighborhood's medical needs. Then I spent the afternoon delivering them to every house in Silverstream Hills. All 215 homes. The response was immediate. By evening, My phone was ringing off the hook. Neighbors calling to express support, to share their own HOA horror stories, to ask what they could do to help. Mrs. Chen called in tears, worried that I'd have to stop making deliveries. I assured her that wasn't going to happen. Thursday morning, I got a call from Linda Martinez, another HOA board member. Linda was Brenda's opposite in every way, warm, reasonable, and actually interested in serving the community rather than ruling it. "Vincent, I need to talk to you about this ski rack situation," she said. "Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a cafe in Boulder. Linda arrived with a folder full of documents and an apologetic expression. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said once we'd ordered. "I didn't know about your citation until I got Dave's letter. Brenda's been handling enforcement actions without consulting the full board, which is technically allowed under our bylaws but goes against the spirit of shared governance. So she's acting alone on this. On this and several other citations," Linda confirmed. When I started asking questions, I found out she's been issuing violations left and right without board approval. The rest of us only hear about it if someone appeals. "That doesn't seem right." "It's not," Linda agreed. "But according to our bylaws, the president has authority to enforce existing rules. We can only override her with a majority board vote, and we need a meeting for that. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. Brenda made sure to time this perfectly, didn't she?" Linda's expression confirmed my suspicion. "I can't prove that, but yes, I think so. Look, Vincent, I'm going to be straight with you. Brenda has it out for you specifically. She's mentioned multiple times in board meetings that she doesn't like having commercial vehicles in the neighborhood. She thinks it lowers property values. Has she cited anyone else for commercial vehicles? No, and that's the problem. She approved Tom Harrison's ladder rack like she told you, but she's never liked your business. She's complained that having a medical delivery service based in the neighborhood makes us look like a retirement community." I stared at her. That's her reasoning. People need medical supplies regardless of age. "I deliver to families with kids, middle-aged people with chronic conditions, and yes, elderly residents. So what?" "I agree with you completely," Linda said. "And I think the rest of the board will too if we can get this to a vote. But I need you to formally submit your application for the modification approval. That will force a board discussion." "Already done," I said. "I submitted it yesterday." "Good. Then here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call for an emergency board meeting next week to discuss this situation. We have the authority to do that if a matter requires urgent attention, and I think this qualifies. Brenda can't refuse without looking like a tyrant. She might not care about looking like a tyrant. Let me worry about that," Linda said. "In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Keep making your deliveries. Keep documenting everything, and for God's sake, don't remove that rack." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening. Linda had worked fast, getting the other 3 board members to agree it was necessary. The meeting would be held at the HOA office and was open to homeowners, as required by Colorado law. I showed up 15 minutes early to find the small parking lot already half full. Apparently word had spread. Inside, the office's main room had been set up with the board table at the front and rows of folding chairs facing it. Nearly 40 people were already seated, with more filtering in behind me. Brenda sat at the center of the board table, her expression icy. Linda sat to her right along with the other board members. Frank Delacroix, a retired accountant, Susan Park, a nurse who worked at Boulder Community Health, and Robert Yamamoto, who owned a software company. I'd met them all at various neighborhood events, but had never interacted with them in an official capacity. At 7 sharp, Brenda called the meeting to order. "This emergency meeting has been called to discuss a pending enforcement action," she began, her voice clipped and professional. "The board will hear from the homeowner in question, Vincent Kovacs, regarding his application for approval of a vehicle modification." Linda immediately raised her hand. "Before we get to that, I'd like to address the enforcement action itself. Vincent received a violation notice and has been accruing fines for nearly 2 weeks. That seems premature given that he was never informed about the approval process." "The approval process is outlined in the bylaws," Brenda said. "All homeowners are expected to be familiar with the bylaws." "The bylaws are 87 pages long and written in dense legal language," Susan interjected. "I'm a board member and I didn't know about that specific provision until this case came up. How can we expect homeowners to know every detail?" "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse," Brenda replied. "It is when the rules are selectively enforced," Linda shot back. "Vincent has identified multiple other homeowners with similar vehicle modifications who haven't been cited. Why is that?" "Those situations received board approval as required," Brenda said. "Where's the documentation?" Frank asked, speaking for the first time. "I've been on this board for 6 years and I don't recall voting on Tom Harrison's ladder rack." Brenda's jaw tightened. "That was approved in an email vote." "Email votes are only valid for emergency situations," Robert said, pulling out his own copy of the bylaws. "They require documentation and must be ratified at the next board meeting. I don't see any ratification in our minutes." The meeting was quickly spiraling away from Brenda's control. I watched as she shuffled through papers, clearly trying to find documentation that didn't exist. "The point is," she finally said, "that Vincent's ski rack violates our bylaws and he needs to either remove it or receive board approval to keep it. That's why we're here." "Fine," Linda said. "Vincent, please present your case." I stood and walked to the front of the room. I'd prepared a short presentation with photos of my truck, examples of the equipment I transported, and testimonials from clients. Several of those clients were in the room, including Mrs. Chen, Margaret Sullivan, and Bill Morrison. "I've been operating Kovacs Medical Delivery for 5 years," I began. "In that time, I've made over 10,000 deliveries to more than 300 clients in the Boulder area. About 40 of those clients live right here in Silver Stream Hills. I deliver oxygen, medications, medical equipment, and supplies that people need to manage chronic conditions and recover from injuries. Without my service, many of these people would struggle to get their necessary supplies." I clicked to the next slide, showing photos of my truck with and without the ski rack. The ski rack is essential to my business. It allows me to transport longer items like crutches, walkers, and tall oxygen tanks that won't fit in my truck bed with all the other supplies. Without it, I'd have to make multiple trips for many deliveries, which would increase costs and reduce efficiency. That means higher prices for clients and longer wait times for essential medical supplies. I could see several people in the audience nodding along. I continued. "I understand the HOA wants to maintain aesthetic standards, but I also think we need to balance that against the practical needs of our community. My truck is clean, well-maintained, and professionally used. The ski rack is a neutral color that matches the truck. It's not an eyesore, and it serves a critical function. I'm asking the board to approve my application and recognize that some flexibility is necessary to support businesses that serve our neighbors." When I finished, Brenda immediately spoke up. "The issue isn't whether Mr. Kovacs provides a valuable service. The issue is whether we allow individual homeowners to decide which rules apply to them. If we make an exception for Vincent, we'll have to make exceptions for everyone." That's not true, Susan said. We can evaluate requests on a case-by-case basis, which is exactly what the approval process is designed for. Vincent's situation is unique. He's not asking to paint his house hot pink or park a broken-down RV in his driveway. He's asking to keep necessary business equipment on a vehicle he uses daily. I agree, Robert added. This seems like exactly the kind of situation where an exception makes sense. I disagree, Brenda said firmly. If we approve this, we're setting a precedent that commercial vehicles and equipment are acceptable in a residential neighborhood. That affects everyone's property values. You have any evidence that a ski rack on a medical delivery truck affects property values? Frank asked. Brenda didn't answer directly. It's common sense. People don't want to live next to a commercial operation. I live 3 houses down from Vincent, someone called from the audience. It was Tom Harrison, the contractor Brenda had mentioned. His truck doesn't bother me at all. You approved my ladder rack, Brenda. Why is this different? Your situation was different, Brenda insisted, but she was clearly flustered. Linda called for a vote. All in favor of approving Vincent's application for the ski rack modification. 4 hands went up, Linda, Susan, Frank, and Robert. Only Brenda voted against it. The motion passes, Linda announced. Vincent, your application is approved. The fines are waived. I felt relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. Brenda's expression had gone from icy to arctic. This meeting is adjourned, she said curtly, gathering her papers and walking out before anyone else could speak. The next few weeks were relatively peaceful. I kept making my deliveries, the ski rack stayed on my truck, and Brenda didn't contact me. I should have known it wouldn't last. In late March, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, Brenda was citing me for operating a commercial business from my home without proper authorization. According to the letter, Section 18 of the bylaws prohibited home-based businesses that generated vehicle traffic, noise, or other disturbances to the neighborhood. I was being fined $100 per day until I ceased operations or received business approval from the board. I immediately called Dave. She's retaliating, he said after I read him the letter. This is textbook retaliation and it's legally problematic for her. What can I do? First, we document that this is retaliation. The timing is suspicious. You just won your appeal and now she's hitting you with a new violation. Second, we look at whether this bylaw even applies to you. Do you have clients coming to your home? No, I deliver to them. You store inventory at your home, just in my truck and garage. Nothing visible from the street. You generate noise or disturbances. No, I leave in the morning, make deliveries all day, and come home in the evening. It's no different from anyone else who commutes to work, except my office is my truck. Then this bylaw doesn't apply to you, Dave said. Your business doesn't generate traffic or disturbances to the neighborhood. You're not running a retail operation or a noisy workshop. You're simply using your home as a base for a mobile service business. Try explaining that to Brenda. We will, Dave said. I'm going to send another letter to the board, this time with a formal complaint about Brenda's conduct. She's clearly targeting you and that's not acceptable. In the meantime, don't pay these fines. We're going to fight this. Dave's letter went out the next day. It was strongly worded, accusing Brenda of harassment, selective enforcement, and retaliation. It demanded that the new citation be withdrawn and that Brenda recuse herself from any further matters involving my property. Brenda's response came not from her, but from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter stated that the HOA stood by its citation, that Brenda had acted within her authority as president, and that if I didn't comply with the order to cease business operations, The HOA would seek legal remedies, including liens on my property. They're escalating, Dave said when I showed him the letter. That's actually good for us. It shows they're not interested in reasonable resolution, which supports our claim of harassment. But we need to be smart about this. If they file a lien, it could affect your ability to refinance or sell your home. So, what do? We go on offense, Dave said. We file a complaint in Boulder County Court alleging that the HOA is violating Colorado's Fair Housing Act and common interest community laws. We ask for an injunction against the fines and a declaration that your business is permitted under the bylaws, and we ask for attorney's fees and damages for harassment. That sounds expensive. It will be, Dave admitted. But I think we can win, and if we do, the HOA pays. Plus, once we file, they'll have to take us seriously. Right now, Brenda thinks she can bully you into submission. A lawsuit will change that calculation. We filed the lawsuit in early April. The complaint laid out everything. The initial ski rack citation, the inconsistent enforcement, the retaliatory business violation, and Brenda's pattern of harassment. We included declarations from neighbors supporting my business, financial records showing I was a legitimate operation, and documentation of other home-based businesses in Silver Stream Hills that Brenda hadn't cited. The lawsuit got attention. The local Boulder newspaper ran a story about it, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between a small business owner and an overzealous HOA. The story included interviews with several of my clients, including Mrs. Chen, who told the reporter that I was an angel who made sure she never went without her oxygen. The publicity seemed to wake up the other HOA board members. Linda called me the day after the article ran. Vincent, I need you to know that the board didn't authorize the HOA to hire an attorney or fight your lawsuit, she said. Brenda did that on her own. We only found out when we got served with the complaint. Can she do that? Technically, yes. She has authority to hire professionals on behalf of the HOA for legal matters, but she's supposed to consult with the board, especially for something this significant. We're calling an emergency meeting to discuss this. Another emergency meeting. This situation has gotten out of hand, Linda said. Brenda's personal vendetta against you is costing the HOA money and exposing us to liability. The board needs to address it. The emergency meeting was scheduled for that Friday. This time, I brought Dave with me. The room was even more crowded than the last meeting, with at least 60 homeowners packed in. Brenda called the meeting to order with her usual briskness, but I could see cracks in her composure. She looked tired, and her usual perfect appearance was slightly disheveled. We're here to discuss the pending litigation filed by Vincent Kovacs against the HOA, she began. We're here to discuss why you hired an attorney and authorized legal action without consulting the board, Linda interrupted. This is a significant decision that affects all homeowners. We should have voted on it. The bylaws give the president authority to handle legal matters, Brenda said defensively. The bylaws also require fiscal responsibility and board consultation for major expenditures, Frank said. Legal fees aren't cheap. How much have we spent so far? The attorney's retainer was $5,000, Brenda admitted. The room erupted. Homeowners started shouting questions and complaints. $5,000 was a significant chunk of the HOA's annual budget, and people wanted to know why it was being spent to harass a neighbor who provided medical services. Susan called for order. Let me be clear about something. I'm a nurse. I work with patients who depend on home medical services every day. Vincent provides an essential service, and from everything I've seen, he does it professionally and ethically. This vendetta needs to stop. It's not a vendetta, Brenda snapped. It's about enforcing our bylaws and maintaining our community standards. Then why haven't you cited the Johnsons for their landscaping business? Someone called from the audience. They have 3 trucks with company logos parked in their driveway every night. Or the Patels. Someone else added, Mrs. Patel runs a catering business from her home. I've seen delivery vans there all the time. Or Dan Miller, a third person called. He's a real estate agent who meets clients at his house regularly. Brenda's face was flushing red. Those are different situations. How? Linda demanded. Explain to us exactly how those businesses are different from Vincent's. Brenda couldn't. She stammered through a few non-answers before Linda cut her off. I'm calling for a vote, Linda said. I move that the HOA withdraw its citation against Vincent Kovacs, settle the lawsuit, and issue a formal apology for the harassment. I second, Susan said immediately. All in favor? 4 hands went up, only Brenda abstained. The motion passes, Linda announced. Brenda, contact the attorney tomorrow and have him prepare settlement documents. We're done with this nonsense. But Brenda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed. All 4 of them, cut deep enough that they couldn't be patched. The ski rack had been damaged too, with what looked like crowbar marks denting the aluminum bars. I called the police immediately. Boulder County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes, took photos, and filed a report. They asked if I had any idea who might have done it. I have a pretty good idea, I said, and explained the HOA situation. The deputy, a young woman named Officer Riley, listened carefully and took notes. Do you have any proof it was her? No direct proof, but the timing is suspicious. We'll investigate, Officer Riley promised. In the meantime, if you have security cameras, check the footage, and if anything else happens, call us immediately. I didn't have cameras, but my neighbor 2 houses down did. Tom Harrison had installed a comprehensive security system after his work trailer was broken into the previous year. His cameras covered not just his property but a good chunk of the street, including where my truck was parked. I walked over and explained the situation. Tom pulled up his footage immediately. At 3:15 that morning, a figure dressed in dark clothing had approached my truck carrying something that looked like a crowbar. The person spent about 10 minutes working on the truck, then walked away down the street. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the person definitively, but the build and gait looked feminine. More importantly, Tom's camera captured where the person went, straight to Brenda's house. That's got to be her, Tom said. Holy crap, Vincent, she vandalized your truck. Can you send me this footage? I asked. Already done, Tom said, handing me a USB drive. Take this to the police. This is criminal. I drove to the sheriff's station on my spare tire and showed Officer Riley the footage. She watched it 3 times, taking notes. This is good, she said. It's not definitive proof, but combined with the circumstances, it's enough for us to investigate further. We'll go talk to Miss Kensington. What happens then? If she admits to it, we'll arrest her for criminal mischief and possibly vandalism. If she denies it, we'll need more evidence. But this footage is pretty compelling. I filed an insurance claim for the tires and the ski rack damage, then called a mobile tire service to get my truck drivable again. The whole ordeal cost me half a day of work and several $100s in deductible, not to mention the stress and anger. That evening, Officer Riley called me back. We interviewed Miss Kensington, she said. She denies being involved. She claims she was home asleep at the time and has no idea who damaged your truck. What about the footage showing someone walking to her house? She says the person in the video could have been anyone walking down the street, and that her house is a corner lot so people walk past it all the time. She's technically right. We can't prove definitively that the person entered her house. So that's it. She gets away with it. Not necessarily, Officer Riley said. We're going to check with other neighbors to see if anyone else has footage or saw anything. And we're going to look into Miss Kensington's background to see if there are any prior incidents. Sometimes people with a pattern of escalating behavior have left evidence elsewhere. What should I do in the meantime? Install security cameras, Officer Riley advised. If she did this once, she might try again. Document everything. And if you feel threatened or unsafe, don't hesitate to call 911. I took her advice and ordered security cameras that night. They arrived 2 days later, and Tom helped me install them. We set up cameras covering my driveway, front door, and the street in front of my house. Everything recorded to cloud storage with motion-activated alerts sent to my phone. The HOA situation moved forward in the meantime. True to the board's vote, the HOA's attorney contacted Dave to discuss settlement terms. Dave pushed hard, demanding not just withdrawal of the citations, but also a formal written apology, reimbursement for my legal fees, and a guarantee that the HOA would not take any further action against my business. The attorney initially balked at the legal fees, but Dave pointed out that we were prepared to continue the lawsuit and seek damages if necessary. After some negotiation, they agreed to our terms. The settlement included a payment of $8,000 to cover my legal fees and damages, a formal letter stating that my business operations and ski rack were approved by the board, and a clause prohibiting the HOA from taking any action against me related to my business for a period of 5 years. It's a good settlement, Dave told me. You're getting vindication, money, and protection. Take it. I signed the papers in late April. The formal apology arrived a week later, signed by Linda and the other board members. Notably, Brenda's name was absent. That absence was explained when Linda called me the following Monday. I wanted you to hear this from me directly, she said. Brenda resigned from the HOA board over the weekend. She submitted a letter saying she was stepping down effective immediately due to personal reasons. Personal reasons. I said skeptically, "That's what the letter says. But between you and me, we were preparing to remove her. The board took a vote last week, and we had the numbers to oust her for mismanagement and exceeding her authority." I think she realized which way the wind was blowing and decided to resign rather than be removed. "Good riddance," I said. "I couldn't agree more," Linda replied. "We're going to hold an election for a new president next month. In the meantime, I'm acting president, and I promise you things are going to be different. No more harassment, no more arbitrary enforcement. We're going back to being a reasonable HOA that serves the community instead of ruling it." I thanked her and hung up feeling like maybe, finally, this nightmare was over. It wasn't. 3 nights later, my security cameras caught someone approaching my truck again at 2 in the morning. This time, I got an alert on my phone immediately. I pulled up the live feed and watched as a figure in dark clothing walked up my driveway carrying what looked like a can. I called 911 while pulling on clothes. "Someone's vandalizing my truck right now," I told the dispatcher. "I have it on camera." "Stay inside," the dispatcher instructed. "Deputies are on the way." Through my camera feed, I watched the figure pour liquid on my truck and reach for something that might have been matches or a lighter. That's when I heard sirens. The figure froze, looked toward the street, and ran. 2 sheriff's vehicles arrived within seconds, and I saw deputies chasing the figure on foot. I ran outside in time to see them tackle someone 2 houses down. Under the streetlight, I could clearly see who it was. Brenda Kensington, still in her designer athleisure wear, was being handcuffed on my neighbor's lawn. Officer Riley was one of the deputies who arrived as backup. She walked over to me while other deputies secured the scene. "That's her," I said, pointing. "That's Brenda Kensington, the HOA president who's been harassing me." "Former HOA president," Officer Riley corrected, having heard about the resignation. "And she's under arrest now for attempted arson, criminal mischief, and trespassing. Your cameras got everything." "Everything," I confirmed, pulling up the footage on my phone. The video showed Brenda clearly approaching my truck, pouring what turned out to be gasoline on it, and pulling out a lighter before fleeing from the sirens. Combined with the evidence from the previous vandalism, it was more than enough to charge her. They took Brenda away in handcuffs. She didn't say a word, just stared at me with an expression of pure hatred as they loaded her into the patrol car. My truck reeked of gasoline, but it was otherwise undamaged. The deputies took photos, collected the gas can as evidence, and took my statement. "She could have killed someone," Officer Riley said, "if she'd lit that fire and it spread to your house or the neighbors' homes. This is serious." "I know," I said, still trying to process what had almost happened. "You'll need to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement and sign some paperwork. But for now, you should probably wash that gasoline off your truck and try to get some sleep." Sleep was impossible. I spent the next few hours hosing down my truck and sitting in my kitchen, replaying the footage over and over. Brenda had been willing to burn my truck, possibly my house, possibly me, all because I wouldn't remove a ski rack. It was insane. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's station and gave a detailed statement. Officer Riley walked me through the charges. "Miss Kensington is being charged with attempted arson, criminal mischief for the previous tire slashing, and several other counts," she explained. "The district attorney's office is taking this very seriously. Attempted arson is a felony. She's looking at significant prison time if convicted. What about bail? She made bail this morning, but she has a no-contact order. She's not allowed within 500 feet of you or your property, and she's not allowed to contact you directly or indirectly. If she violates that order, she goes straight back to jail." The news spread through Silver Stream Hills like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew that Brenda had been arrested for trying to burn my truck. The reactions ranged from shock to a grim kind of satisfaction. Apparently, a lot of people had been waiting for Brenda to go too far. Linda called me that evening. "Vincent, I don't even know what to say." I knew Brenda was difficult, but I never imagined she was capable of something like this. "Neither did I admitted. "The board wants you to know that we support you completely. If you need anything, or if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know." "I appreciate that, Linda." "Really? I just want to get back to normal." "We all do," she said. Brenda's criminal case moved through the system over the next few months. She hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that she'd been under extreme stress and wasn't thinking clearly. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the previous vandalism, the pattern of harassment documented in my lawsuit, and multiple witnesses who testified about Brenda's escalating obsession with me. In July, Brenda pleaded guilty to attempted arson and criminal mischief as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my truck and the cost of installing my security cameras. I attended the sentencing hearing. Brenda didn't look at me once. Her attorney made a statement about how she'd lost her way and was deeply sorry for her actions. Brenda herself said nothing. The judge wasn't sympathetic. "Miss Kensington, you held a position of trust in your community," the judge said. "Instead of using that position to serve your neighbors, You used it to harass and ultimately endanger someone who was providing valuable services to those same neighbors. Your actions were not only criminal but deeply selfish and dangerous. This court takes attempted arson very seriously. You're fortunate that Mr. Kovacs had security cameras and that law enforcement arrived quickly, or we might be looking at far more serious charges. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling strange. Not happy exactly, but relieved. It was finally over. Life in Silverstream Hills gradually returned to normal. Linda was elected HOA president in a landslide, and she immediately set about reforming the association's practices. The bylaws were reviewed and simplified, enforcement became reasonable and consistent, and the HOA went back to being what it was supposed to be: a community organization that maintained common areas and resolved disputes, not a petty dictatorship. My business continued to grow. The publicity from the lawsuit and Brenda's arrest had actually brought me new clients, people who appreciated that I'd stood up for what was right. I hired a third part-time employee and leased a second truck to handle the volume. The ski rack stayed on my truck, exactly where it belonged. Mrs. Chen still got her oxygen deliveries twice a week. Bill Morrison still chatted with me about the Broncos. The Patterson kid was doing great, his diabetes well managed with the supplies I delivered. Margaret Sullivan had recovered from her hip surgery and was back to working in her garden. Life went on. One afternoon in late August, I was making a delivery to a new client when I ran into Tom Harrison at a stoplight. He pulled up next to me and rolled down his window. "Hey, Vincent," he called. "How's business?" "Busy," I called back. "Can't complain." "Good man." "Hey, we're having a neighborhood barbecue next weekend. You should come. Linda's organizing it. She's trying to rebuild community spirit after, everything." "I'll be there," I promised. The barbecue was held at the subdivision's common area, a small park with pavilions and grills. Nearly 100 people showed up, including most of my clients and neighbors I'd never formally met. Linda had organized games for the kids, and someone had set up a volleyball net. As I stood there with a burger in one hand and a beer in the other, watching neighbors laugh and kids play, I thought about how close I'd come to losing all of this. Brenda's harassment had been exhausting and stressful, and her attempted arson could have been catastrophic. But in the end, standing up for what was right had been worth it. Mrs. Chen found me near the grill. "Vincent, dear, I wanted to thank you again for everything." "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Chen. I'm just doing my job." "No," she said firmly. "You did more than your job. You fought for all of us, for this whole community. That woman tried to bully you and you didn't back down. That takes courage." "I just wanted to keep my ski rack," I said with a smile. "It was never about the ski rack," she said wisely. "It was about standing up to someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her, that she could push people around. You showed her she was wrong. You showed all of us that it's worth fighting for what's right." Later, as the sun set and people started packing up, Linda approached me. "This was a good day," she said. "The neighborhood needed this." "It was great," I agreed. "Thanks for organizing it." "Thank you for saving our HOA," she said seriously. "I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. If you hadn't fought back against Brenda, who knows how far she would have gone. She might have driven out half the neighborhood with her harassment. You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone." "I had help," I said. "You and the other board members, my neighbors, my lawyer. It wasn't just me." "But you started it," Linda said. "You were the one who said, 'No, this isn't right. I'm not going to accept this.' That matters." As I drove home that evening, my truck's ski rack silhouetted against the sunset, I reflected on the past 6 months. It had been a hell of a fight over something as simple as a piece of metal bolted to my roof. But it had never really been about the ski rack. It had been about principle, about community, about standing up to bullies and refusing to be intimidated. My phone buzzed with a text from my next morning's first client confirming their delivery time. I smiled. Tomorrow I'd be back to work, doing what I loved, serving the people who needed me. The ski rack would stay right where it belonged, and Brenda would be exactly where she belonged, paying for her crimes and learning that actions have consequences. Sometimes the smallest battles matter the most. Sometimes refusing to back down over a ski rack means standing up for an entire community. And sometimes, when you do the right thing for long enough, justice actually prevails. The ski rack stayed. The business thrived. The community healed. And I kept delivering medical supplies to people who needed them, driving through the Colorado foothills with my equipment secured on top of my truck, exactly as it should be. Brenda had demanded I remove my ski rack, and she'd learned the hard way that some demands aren't worth making. Too bad for her that she'd picked a fight with someone who used that truck to serve the very community she claimed to protect. In the end, the community chose the person who actually cared about them over the person who only cared about power. Life in Silver Stream Hills went on, better than before, stronger than before. And every time I drove past the HOA office, now run by reasonable people who understood that communities are built on cooperation and mutual respect rather than petty tyranny, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The ski rack had become a symbol, a reminder that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's hard, even when it costs you, even when it's just about a piece of equipment on a truck. That truck kept rolling. That ski rack kept holding equipment, and those deliveries kept happening. Because in the end, that's what mattered, helping people, serving the community, and refusing to let bullies win. The story could have ended differently. Brenda could have succeeded in driving me out, in destroying my business and getting her way through intimidation and harassment. But she didn't. And that made all the difference.